Somewhere inside a windowless facility in the United States, a machine is being built that almost nobody is allowed to talk about. Not because it doesn't exist, but because what it can do, if it works, could quietly break every secret ever kept by every government on Earth. Right now, America is not running one classified quantum program. It is running three separate efforts, funded through different agencies, hidden behind different cover stories, and pointed at the same terrifying finish line. And the strangest part is not that they exist. The strangest part is what happens when you connect them. For years, quantum computing has been sold to the public as a slow, sleepy science project. Something for university labs and tech conferences. Cute little machines that might someday help design better batteries or simulate a new drug molecule. That story was never entirely false, but it was never the whole truth either. Behind that friendly public image, there has always been a second, much darker conversation happening in rooms most of us never get invited into. A conversation about what happens the day someone finally builds a quantum computer powerful enough to break modern encryption. Intelligence agencies call this machine a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. Everyone else just calls it the end of secrets. So let's talk about the three programs. The first one lives inside the Department of Energy, and its name alone tells you how seriously Washington is taking this race. It is called Quantum Genesis. The goal is not incremental improvement. The goal is to build the world's first fault-tolerant, scientifically useful quantum computer, and to do it by 2028. That is not a typo. 2028. For a technology that experts have spent 2 decades describing as maybe possible by the 2030s, compressing the timeline this hard is not normal behavior. It is emergency behavior. Quantum Genesis did not appear out of nowhere. It was born directly out of a presidential executive order signed in June of 2026, one that ordered a whole-of-government sprint toward quantum dominance. The order was blunt about why. Other nations, it said, are moving fast to challenge American leadership in this space, and when a government starts using words like that in an official document, it usually means the private briefings are far more alarming than the public language. What makes Quantum Genesis different from the university research you've probably heard about is scale and intent. This isn't a small team publishing paper stockpile, throwing its full national laboratory system behind, building a working fault-tolerant machine. Fault tolerance is the part that matters most here, because it's the difference between a fragile lab curiosity and a computer that can actually run the kind of long, complex calculations that break real-world encryption. Every serious quantum threat conversation eventually comes back to that one word: fault tolerance. Quantum Genesis is racing toward it on a government clock, not an academic one. Puts this program in a different category than a typical research initiative. This is the agency responsible for Los Alamos, for Oak Ridge, for Lawrence Livermore, the same national laboratory network that designed and maintains America's nuclear arsenal. These facilities already operate under some of the tightest security protocols in the country. When that infrastructure gets repurposed toward a quantum computing sprint, it isn't just about funding, it's about culture. These labs know how to move fast under total secrecy, because they've been doing exactly that since the 1940s. The current National Quantum Initiative framework, first signed into law back in 2018, laid the original groundwork for this entire ecosystem, authorizing well over $1 billion split across the Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That original law has since lapsed and gone through multiple failed reauthorization attempts in Congress, yet the executive branch has kept pushing forward anyway through direct presidential orders. That alone should tell you something. When legislative funding stalls but executive urgency accelerates, it usually means the underlying threat assessment hasn't slowed down, even if the paperwork has. Now here's where the story gets interesting, because Quantum Genesis is not operating alone. It sits alongside a second effort, one that has been running quietly since 2024, deep inside the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. You probably know DARPA as the agency behind the Internet's early ancestor, or GPS, or stealth aircraft. Now add quantum supremacy to that list. Their program is called the Quantum Benchmarking Initiative, and it grew out of an even more obscure earlier effort called US2QC, short for Underexplored Systems for Utility-Scale Quantum Computing. Here's what makes this program fascinating. DARPA isn't trying to build a quantum computer itself. It's trying to figure out, with brutal scientific honesty, which private companies actually have a real shot at building one first. Think of it as a national talent scout program, except the prize isn't a trophy. The prize is being verified by the United States government as having a credible path to utility-scale quantum computing by the year 2033. Companies like Microsoft and PsiQuantum have already advanced deep into this pipeline, reaching a validation stage where DARPA's own team of experts pokes and prods their designs to separate genuine breakthroughs from marketing hype. Nearly 20 companies entered this pipeline at the earliest stage. Only a handful have survived the cuts to reach the more advanced phases. That filtering process alone tells you something important. This isn't a friendly innovation contest with participation trophies. It is a triage operation designed to identify, as fast as possible, which technological path is most likely to produce a machine capable of doing things today's supercomputers simply cannot. And when a defense agency runs triage at this level of intensity, it's almost never purely about scientific curiosity. The DARPA program manager overseeing this effort has said something worth sitting with for a moment. He said it now seems likely that someone, somewhere, will build a utility-scale quantum computer by 2033. Not maybe, not possibly, likely. The open question isn't if anymore. It's who crosses that finish line first and whether that someone is flying an American flag or someone else's. Look closer at who's actually still standing in this pipeline, and the picture gets even more interesting. Microsoft and PsiQuantum were among the earliest companies to reach the final validation phase, each pursuing a completely different technical approach to the same goal. Microsoft has bet heavily on what's called a topological qubit, a design meant to be inherently more stable and less prone to the error rates that plague most quantum systems. PsiQuantum has taken a photonic route instead, building its architecture around particles of light rather than the trapped ions or superconducting circuits that dominate headlines from companies like IBM and Google. Google Quantum AI itself only joined the earliest stage of this pipeline more recently, in the fall of 2025, which tells you the roster is still shifting even as some competitors race ahead into deeper validation phases. Quantinuum, another major player in the trapped ion space, has also advanced through the benchmarking gauntlet, announcing new strategic partnerships aimed at merging quantum processing with traditional high-performance computing systems. Watching which companies survive each cut and which technical approach each one champions is basically like watching a real-time map of where American quantum expertise is actually concentrated, verified not by press releases, but by a defense agency's own independent evaluation team. That brings us to the third program, and this is the one that tends to make people uncomfortable once they understand it. Because while Quantum Genesis and the DARPA benchmarking effort are at least partially public-facing initiatives with press releases and named contractors, the third piece of this puzzle lives almost entirely in the shadows. It touches the National Security Agency, and it touches something intelligence researchers have long referred to as the harvest now, decrypt later strategy. Here's how that strategy works, and once you understand it, you'll never think about encrypted data the same way again. Adversarial intelligence services don't need a working quantum computer today to hurt the United States today. All they need to do is intercept and store encrypted communications now, quietly, patiently, and wait. Diplomatic cables, military logistics, weapons designs, financial systems. All of it gets vacuumed up and archived, sitting in cold storage, useless for now. But the moment a cryptographically relevant quantum computer comes online anywhere in the world, all of that stored data becomes instantly readable. Every secret harvested over the past decade unlocks at once. This is precisely why the National Security Agency has been pushing so hard, so publicly, for a migration to post-quantum cryptography years before anyone has actually built the machine that would break the old systems. It sounds almost backwards until you understand the harvest now, decrypt later math. If your secrets need to stay secret for 20 years, and someone might crack the code in 10, you don't have 20 years to fix your encryption. You have far less. And the NSA has told federal agencies bluntly that some new cryptographic transitions can take 20 years or more to fully deploy across every national security system. Do the math on that timeline, and you start to understand the real urgency. This is also where an entirely separate agency enters. The story, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. Working alongside the NSA, CISA has spent the last several years building out risk assessments across dozens of what it calls national critical functions, essentially mapping every corner of American infrastructure that depends on encryption to keep running safely. Power grids, water systems, financial clearinghouses, telecommunications backbones. Each one of these sectors is being quietly evaluated for how exposed it would be the moment quantum decryption becomes real. Deadlines have already come and gone for parts of this process, with some target dates slipping by weeks or months as the sheer scale of the migration becomes clearer to everyone involved. There's also the Commercial National Security Algorithm Suite, a set of cryptographic standards the NSA maintains specifically for systems that protect the most sensitive classified information in the country. That suite is being treated as an interim bridge, a stopgap measure meant to hold the line while the broader government slowly transitions toward algorithms specifically designed to resist quantum attacks. The existence of an interim bridge strategy tells you something important on its own. Nobody inside these agencies believes the current encryption standard has an indefinite shelf life anymore. They're not asking if it will eventually fail. They're managing exactly how much runway is left before it does. But defense alone isn't the whole story of that third program. Historical pattern of American intelligence agencies suggests they are not simply sitting back and hoping to outdefend the threat. Leaked intelligence documents from over a decade ago revealed the existence of a program with a chillingly direct name, Penetrating Hard Targets. Its stated purpose was to develop a cryptographically useful quantum computer capable of breaking encryption that protects some of the world's most sensitive data, including foreign diplomatic, military, and financial communications. Now, that particular program was exposed years ago through leaked documents, and officially, very little has been confirmed about its current status. But intelligence and defense analysts widely believe that offensive quantum code-breaking research never stopped. It simply went deeper underground, absorbed new funding streams, and rebranded under layers of classification that make it nearly impossible to trace through public budget documents. Some reporting has openly speculated that the Pentagon has quietly classified an entirely separate quantum effort beyond what the public knows about, though officials have carefully avoided confirming or denying the specifics. What made those original leaked documents so striking wasn't just that the program existed. It was the budget figure attached to it, reportedly close to $80 million funneled through the intelligence community's classified research arm, at a time when public quantum computing research was still measured in a handful of small university grants. That kind of funding gap between what the public sector was openly spending and what the classified world was quietly spending told researchers everything they needed to know about where the real priority actually sat. Public research was the visible tip of a much larger, mostly submerged iceberg. It's also worth remembering that classification itself operates on a delay. A program discovered through leaked documents from over a decade ago tells you what the intelligence community was doing then, not necessarily what it's doing now. If anything, the gap between what became public knowledge and what has since evolved in total secrecy has almost certainly widened, not narrowed. Every year that passes without another leak is another year where offensive quantum code-breaking capability could be advancing entirely outside of public awareness, funded through classified budget lines that never show up in any congressional hearing transcript most citizens will ever read. So here's the picture forming in front of you. One program, Quantum Genesis, chasing the fastest possible path to a fault-tolerant asecond program, the DARPA Quantum Benchmarking Initiative, acting as the government's talent scouting and verification arm, hunting for whichever private company might get there first. And a third, far quieter thread running through the National Security Agency and the broader intelligence community, focused on both defending against and potentially building offensive quantum code-breaking capability. 3 programs, 3 agencies, 3 different public postures, ranging from fully public to almost entirely classified, but connected by one single unspoken question. Who gets there first, and what happens to the rest of the world's secrets the moment they do? Let's slow down and talk about why this matters so much that it justifies 3 separate national efforts running in parallel instead of one unified push. Part of the answer is redundancy. Governments hate single points of failure, especially in a race this consequential. If Quantum Genesis stalls on the engineering side, DARPA's benchmarking pipeline might still identify a private sector winner. IF, the private sector path, underdelivers. The National Laboratory System provides a backstop. And running the intelligence community's offensive and defensive quantum work as a separate, more compartmentalized track keeps the most sensitive code-breaking research insulated from public scrutiny and foreign intelligence penetration. Whoever builds the first cryptographically relevant quantum computer doesn't just gain a scientific milestone. Every corporation and every financial system that hasn't yet migrated to quantum-resistant encryption, nuclear launch protocols, intelligence networks, global banking infrastructure, diplomatic backchannels, all of it potentially exposed in one stroke to whichever nation crosses that finish line first and chooses to use the capability offensively rather than just defensively. Consider also how differently each of these 3 programs would behave if they were suddenly forced to merge into one. A single unified program means a single point of failure, a single set of personnel who could be compromised, a single facility that becomes an obvious target for espionage or sabotage. By keeping Quantum Genesis, the DARPA benchmarking pipeline, and the intelligence community's classified quantum work structurally separate, the United States effectively builds in its own version of biological redundancy. Even if a foreign intelligence service manages to penetrate one thread of this effort, the other 2 continue operating largely undisturbed, unaware of exactly how much damage occurred elsewhere. It's a defensive architecture built directly into the offense itself. There's a psychological angle here too, one that rarely gets discussed. Compartmentalization doesn't just protect information from foreign adversaries. It protects the government from its own potential leaks. The Manhattan Project famously kept even senior officials in the dark about specific technical details outside their own narrow lane, precisely because the fewer people who understood the complete picture, the smaller the surface area for any single leak to cause catastrophic damage. Applying that same 80-year-old lesson to a modern quantum race means that even some of the scientists working inside quantum genesis right now may have no real visibility into what the intelligence community's parallel classified effort actually looks like, and vice versa. That's not science fiction anymore. That's the stated concern of the National Security Agency itself, which has publicly warned that the impact of an adversary gaining access to a working quantum computer could be, in their own words, devastating to national security systems and to the country as a whole. When the agency responsible for protecting the most sensitive communications in the United States uses language that direct, it's worth paying close attention. Now, you might be wondering how China fits into all of this, because no conversation about the quantum race happens in a vacuum. Chinese state media and research institutions have made their own aggressive claims about quantum computing breakthroughs over the past several years, some verified, some heavily disputed by Western scientists. Regardless of how much of that is real progress versus propaganda, the perception of a competitive threat has clearly shaped American policy. The June 2020 executive order didn't just casually mention foreign competition. It explicitly framed the entire push as a response to other nations moving quickly to challenge American leadership in this exact field. This is also why you're seeing quantum technology increasingly described inside defense budgets as a critical technology area, sitting alongside things like hypersonics and next-generation aircraft. Defense research and development spending overall has surged well past $170 billion, with quantum computing carved out as one of the specific priorities driving that growth. That's not the language of a niche academic curiosity. That's the language of a technology being treated as a matter of national survival. It's worth stepping back and asking why this race feels so different from previous technology competitions, like the space race or the early internet build-out. With most technologies, being second place still leaves you in a reasonably strong position. Second place in smartphones still gets you a massive market. Second place in electric vehicles still gets you a thriving industry. Quantum code breaking doesn't work that way. If an adversary builds a working cryptographically relevant quantum computer, years before the United States finishes, migrating its most sensitive systems to quantum-resistant encryption, there is no partial credit. There's just a window, potentially a very large one, where an entire archive of harvested secrets becomes readable all at once. That winner-take-all dynamic is exactly what's driving 3 separate American agencies to run parallel, redundant, occasionally overlapping programs, instead of betting everything on a single approach. European allies are watching this race just as closely, coordinating through their own quantum initiatives while also leaning on American guidance for post-quantum cryptography standards published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Those standards, finalized in 2024 after years of public evaluation, represent one of the few genuinely open and transparent parts of this entire story, a rare moment where classified urgency and public science actually work together in the open. It's a reminder that not everything about this race happens behind locked doors. Some of the most important defensive work is being done in full public view, precisely because encryption standards only work if the entire world can trust and verify them together. Let's bring the National Science Foundation into this picture too, because it adds an important 4th data point, even though today's story focuses on the 3 most classified adjacent efforts. The NSF recently launched something called Project Triad, designed to systematically identify which quantum breakthroughs are actually ready to scale toward real-world use, and which ones should be cut loose because they're not going anywhere fast enough. It's a filtering mechanism, not unlike DARPA's benchmarking approach, but focused more on the civilian research pipeline feeding into all of this. Even the more publicly visible parts of America's quantum strategy are being run with wartime efficiency logic. Cut what's slow, fund what's fast, move. There's a reason the June 2026 executive order also directed the Secretary of War, a title that itself signals how seriously this administration is framing the moment, to identify at least 3 next generations quantum sensor projects within 60 days, with a hard deadline to field those sensors by September of 2028. Quantum sensors are a whole separate rabbit hole from quantum computers, capable of detecting submarines, mapping underground structures, and providing navigation so precise it doesn't need GPS satellites at all. If you're building military systems that no longer rely on GPS, you're preparing for a world where satellite navigation might get jammed, spoofed, or destroyed entirely. That's not a subtle signal about how seriously this technology is being weaponized. The same executive order also pushed NASA into this picture, directing the agency to draft its own plan for extending quantum sensing and networking capabilities into space applications. Think about that for a second. We're not just talking about quantum technology protecting encrypted messages anymore. We're talking about quantum sensors potentially guiding spacecraft, detecting hidden submarines beneath the ocean, and mapping terrain with a level of precision that traditional satellite systems simply cannot match. The order even pushed the Commerce Department to develop plans for strengthening the entire domestic quantum supply chain, treating specialized quantum components almost like the semiconductor shortage crisis of a few years earlier, something too strategically important to leave dependent on foreign manufacturing. There's an entire section of that same order titled, quite plainly, Protecting Quantum Technology. When a piece of federal legislation dedicates an entire section specifically to protecting a technology rather than developing it, that's usually a signal that officials are already worried about espionage, talent poaching, or foreign attempts to acquire sensitive quantum research through less than legitimate channels. Combine that protective posture with the parallel push toward quantum sensing for military applications, and you start to see a strategy that extends far beyond just winning the code-breaking race. It's about building an entire quantum ecosystem that adversaries can't easily infiltrate, replicate, or steal. Now let's return to the uncomfortable core of this story, because it deserves one more pass before we zoom out. The National Security Agency has already told the world through official public guidance that migrating every national security system to quantum-resistant cryptography could take 20 years or more. That guidance was written under the assumption that we still had time. But 3 converging programs, all racing toward a working machine years ahead of previous predictions, are quietly rewriting that assumption in real time. If Quantum Genesis actually hits its 2028 target for a scientifically relevant fault, Tolerant Machine in DARPA's benchmarking pipeline confirms a private sector path to utility-scale computing by 2033. The gap between we have time to prepare and the machine already exists could shrink dramatically faster than the original 20-year migration plan ever accounted for. That mismatch between how fast the offense is moving and how slow the defense is legally required to move is the single most dangerous part of this entire story. And this is exactly why the harvest now, decrypt later strategy matters so much right now, today, in whatever year you're watching this video. Every single day that passes without full migration to post-quantum cryptography is another day of encrypted data being silently collected and stockpiled somewhere, waiting patiently for a machine that might not be nearly as far away as we've all been told to believe. So where does this leave us? 3 programs. 1 racing to build the machine through raw laboratory horsepower. 1 racing to identify whoever in the private sector might build it first. And 1, mostly hidden from public view, racing both to defend against that machines and, if history is any guide, to build offensive quantum code-breaking capability of its own. None of these programs exist in isolation. They feed each other. They compete with each other. And together, they represent the largest, most urgent, most quietly funded technology race the United States has run since the original push to build the atomic bomb. If that comparison sounds dramatic, consider this. The Manhattan Project was also compartmentalized across multiple sites, multiple agencies, and multiple layers of secrecy, specifically so that no single person, not even most of the scientists working on it, understood the full scope of what was being built. Quantum computing's national security race is following an eerily similar structural playbook. Different labs, different agencies, different cover stories, all converging toward one machine that could quietly rewrite the balance of global power the moment it actually works. Back in the 1940s, scientists at Los Alamos worked on bomb design while an entirely separate facility in Oak Ridge focused on enriching uranium. And yet another site in Hanford worked on producing plutonium with almost no cross-communication between the everyday workers at each location. Today, that same compartmentalized structure shows up again, almost site for site. Research. Los Alamos continues its historical role at the intersection of national security and cutting-edge physics. The infrastructure of secrecy, built to contain nuclear knowledge in the 1940s, is, quite literally in some cases, the same physical infrastructure now being repurposed to contain quantum knowledge 80 years later. The difference this time is that the finish line isn't a single explosive test in a New Mexico desert. To be able to read, there won't be a mushroom cloud to announce it. There might not be any announcement at all. We genuinely don't know exactly how close any of these 3 programs are to their ultimate goal. That uncertainty is by design. Classification exists specifically to prevent adversaries, and frankly the public, from having a clear picture of true progress. What we do know is this: the public deadlines being floated, 2028 for a scientifically relevant machine, 2033 for something utility scale and industrially useful, are aggressive by historical standards. And aggressive public deadlines and classified national security programs have a long, well-documented history of being conservative compared to what's actually happening behind closed doors. It's not just governments that should be paying attention to this either. Private companies holding sensitive data with long shelf lives, healthcare records, legal documents, corporate trade secrets, financial histories are increasingly being urged by security researchers to start their own quantum migration planning now, rather than waiting for a mandate to force their hand. The logic is the same harvest now. Decrypt later math that worries the NSA, just applied to corporate boardrooms instead of intelligence agencies. Data, encrypted today with algorithms considered secure today, might not stay secure for the entire lifespan that data actually needs to remain private. A medical record created this year might need to stay confidential for the next 50 years. A quantum computer, arriving in year 15 of that 50-year window, would be more than enough to cause serious damage. This is part of why post-quantum cryptography has quietly become one of the fastest-growing corners of the entire cybersecurity industry, with new startups, established defense contractors, and legacy tech giants all racing to certify their products against the newly finalized government standards. Categories of technology that already have quantum-resistant options available commercially are being labeled as widely available by federal cybersecurity regulators, while more complex systems like networking hardware and identity management platforms are still labeled as transitioning, meaning the tools exist, but widespread adoption is still years away. That gap between what's technically possible and what's actually been deployed across the real world is, in many ways, the true front line of this entire race, far more than any single laboratory experiment. It also raises an uncomfortable question that rarely gets asked out loud. If harvested, encrypted data is already sitting in foreign intelligence archives right now, waiting for decryption capability to catch up, then in a very real sense, some version of this future has already happened. The theft already occurred. What hasn't happened yet is simply the unlocking. And that distinction matters because it means the 3 American programs we've been discussing aren't just racing to build something new. They are racing against a clock that started ticking the moment the first intercepted, encrypted file landed in someone else's storage server. Whatever your read on all of this, one thing should be clear by now. Quantum computing conversation stopped being about future battery technology or slightly faster drug simulations a long time ago. It is, right now, at this very moment, a live national security race with 3 separate American programs running in parallel, chasing a machine that could quietly unlock decades of stockpiled secrets the instant it powers on. The countries that get there first won't necessarily announce it. They might just quietly start knowing things they shouldn't be able to know. If this kind of deep dive into what's actually happening behind the headlines is something you want more of, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one, and drop a like if this connected some dots for you, because there's a lot more of them. This story is still hiding in plain sight, and we're just getting started pulling on the thread. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about classified programs like these. They rarely stay classified forever. Sooner or later, a leaked document surfaces, a whistleblower talks, or a declassification review quietly releases decades-old files into the public record. When that happens, with these 3 quantum programs, and it eventually will, the full picture of how close America actually came, or how close an adversary actually came, will finally become clear. Until then, we're left connecting the dots from the pieces we're allowed to see. 3 agencies, 3 timelines, 1 shared unspoken finish line, and a race that, think about how many other technological revolutions started this exact same way, buried under vague budget line items and unremarkable sounding program names, decades before the public ever fully understood what had been built in the shadows. Stealth aircraft, early satellite reconnaissance, even the internet itself began as a compartmentalized defense project before anyone imagined it would end up in every home on the planet. Quantum computing appears to be following that same quiet, incremental path from classified curiosity toward world-altering infrastructure. Except this time, the stakes attached to secrecy itself are the entire point. So the next time someone tells you quantum computing is still just an academic experiment, years away from mattering, remember these 3 programs. Remember the compressed timelines, the compartmentalized agencies, and the quiet, patient archives of encrypted data already sitting somewhere, waiting. The finish line isn't a distant hypothetical anymore. It's a moving target that keeps getting closer every single year. And right now, almost nobody outside a handful of classified briefing rooms actually knows exactly how close it already is.